Free at last, free at last. Another one of Canada's persecuted pastors was just liberated from COVID-19 tyranny. Drea Humphrey here with Rebel News, and praise God, it's finally over. Those were the words of relief from St. John, New Brunswick Pastor Phil Hutchings. Hutchings is one of two pastors who were arrested in 2021 for allowing worshipers to come together and hear the gospel without COVID-19 mandates being enforced. Hutchings actually spent a week imprisoned for that. And after the church tried to go ahead and adapt to the newfound infringements on freedom of religion in Canada by avoiding the indoor gathering policies and having church outside in a tent, his church was slapped with allegations of contempt of court, for which, if found guilty, Pastor Phil would have landed himself back in jail and the church would have been fined or had to pay significant fines. But then there was you. Many of you came together to support this church, which was called His Tabernacle Family Church. It's now called Higher Life Church. And you donated what you could at our special website called SavePastorPhil.com. All of your money that you donated there went to the Democracy Fund charity, who hired Pastor Phil in the church, a great lawyer named Jonathan Martin. You're going to hear from both Martin and Pastor Phil in this report, and you should know that Chief Justice Dewar has dismissed the case. This is a cause for celebration. Give yourself a pat on the back. But because the target wasn't met, of course, we're going to ask those of you who still have it in you to support this case the full way through. Please go to SavePastorPhil.com and donate what you can to recover the costs of this win. Here's the story.
Yeah, I don't know if it clicked yet because we've walked in this craziness for so long, for the last almost 3 years. So I don't know if the victory's clicked yet, but it's finally done, you know. But after I got out of jail, which is so weird to say, but after I got out, we decided to just have church outside because the restrictions were less restrictive. And I didn't want to, play that game again with the government of going back inside and trying to force people to mask up. So we just did church outside for literally almost an entire year. I mean, these church folks are next level. They're just crazy. When you can do church outdoors, at minus 30 some, I mean, that's just crazy.
Yeah. That's what I was going to say is how cold it was sometimes.
Yeah.
But
So
people still came.
Yeah, they still came. So we threw up a tent just to keep folks kind of out of the elements a bit, and also to protect our equipment. Mm-hmm. And public safety came. Of course, they surveillanced almost every service. They were more faithful to church than some Christians. They actually were on time. And they gave us free live streaming services too. They surveillanced us every Sunday. Just ridiculous. One of them walked through our worship service with their hand on their holster.
My goodness.
It was unbelievable. It was just something right out of a movie. Just crazy people, right? But we put up a tent, and if they thought it was a public, a safety concern, they would have said, hey, stop having services. But they didn't care about safety. They just they cared about pushing a point.
Yeah.
A narrative. And so they just wanted to keep putting me in contempt. So they didn't say nothing. They came, looked at it. If it was putting people in jeopardy, putting people's safety in jeopardy, you think they would have said, okay, let's stop, shut it down. But they didn't. They just smiled. They were friendly and left. And then they tried to throw us in contempt. But thank God, for the Democracy Fund getting behind us, and Jonathan Martin, our lawyer. Yeah. And we got to win. I mean, we had a fight though, because there was one judge we had to get removed because he made a judgment without hearing properly the process of it, of hearing our side. And so thank God we took it to the Court of Appeals. They kicked that judge to the curb, and we got a new one. And she said, this is not an indoor venue, and they threw it out. So
Yeah.
I thank the Lord for it. I seriously, I give God all the praise because it's just been crazy. So this is it. This is the one. It's all done.
So how does that feel like for you and Jamie, the family, the other pastors in the church? How does it feel for you guys to actually be done?
I think it's good. I mean, I think it's like bittersweet. I don't know if I could put it in words. I think it's good that is off of our head, but I'm not satisfied. I want to hit back because these folks need to be held accountable.
Yeah.
And so I'm walking through that too. I'm kind of seeing some options that are available. But people need to be held accountable for this. So.
I agree. Well, we're going to talk to your amazing lawyer hired by the Democracy Fund, thanks to many donations at our special website for people who wanted to help you fight through our Rebel News website. But I wonder now, because everybody was getting the news, whether it was from us or even state-backed media, about the pastors being thrown in jail, the COVID breakers.
Right.
Are you being approached by the news now? Is anybody reaching out to you from the legacy media to tell this story, to tell people about the win and what actually happened, a couple of years later?
You mean some of the mainstream media?
Yeah.
Some of them reached out. It took them a little while. Their tones are definitely changed in their writing, which is funny. For me, I feel like, these media groups, apart from, like Rebel News, obviously, they're corrupt. They're more of a parody than they are, media. But they pushed us. I mean, they dragged us through the mud. They didn't put any positive, they made us out to be, negative. They put a negative spin on anything they spoke about me personally or the church. And, but, now that we won and everything's closed, they seem to start, they wrote pretty fair in this last article. I looked, usually I don't read any of that stuff because it's just a bunch of baloney anyway, but I was curious to see how they would write their tone, but they actually were pretty fair. And so I was pretty impressed, but I'm surprised the province hasn't responded. I haven't heard a statement from them yet. I'm curious to see what they're going to say. But we'll wait for that.
Yeah, if they say anything. And speaking of fair, it looks like the Chief Justice was fair in her decision. One of the things she said is something along the lines of it's not clear whether or not you guys were even aware if you're breaking the rules by putting the tent up as well. And, just to speak to what you're saying with how you were painted by the mainstream media, this was a time of such desperation for so many people.
Right.
And we saw that with suicide attempts go up in children. We saw that with, overdoses happening. And it's always been known, in Canada that spirituality or religion or whatever those things are healthy for people.
Right.
And here you guys are vilified and, it's such a dark time, but you're right. People do need to be held accountable. Is there any other last final words you want to give to anybody who is watching this report before we get on to your lawyer?
Yeah, I think, Canada's best days are not behind us. I feel like Canada's best days are now. We still got a lot of work. They tried to push this COVID narrative, and now they're trying to push this climate change narrative.
Yeah.
And so it's all about control, but, as long as the church draws a hard line, we can hold back the crazy. I really feel like the church is one of the most powerful institutions across the nation. And so if the church can collectively stand together and I feel like it's time to speak out, not to be quiet. We gotta stand up and for our freedoms. If you don't stand for your freedoms, you begin to lose your freedoms. And so thank God for other pastors and other churches and ministers and not just the churches, businesses and other folks across Canada that stood and said, this is ridiculous. Enough is enough of this junk. This is Canada. And so I thank God for people like you and Rebel News and others across the nation. And for folks that stood by us personally. let me just take a minute and say thank you to all the Canadians that stood with, not just Canadians. I couldn't believe how worldwide this was. This a lot of people were watching Canada
in horror.
Yeah. And so I just appreciate everybody that stood with us. This was a win for the church across the nation, a win for Canada. And so I thank God for it. Thank God for you and Rebel News and everybody else. I love you guys very much. Appreciate you.
Well, thank God you're on that couch instead of in a cold, hard cell.
Right. Yeah.
Bless you and the family and the rest of the church.
Appreciate it, sis. Have a good one.
Bye. All right. This is Jonathan Martin from the Law Office of Jonathan Martin, and here to discuss a big win for religious freedom. Thanks for being on Rebel News.
It's my pleasure.
So what do you make of the justice's decision?
Well, it's obviously a great win for Pastor Phil and the other pastors of his Tabernacle Church, his Higher Life Church now. I was definitely quite happy, but at the same time, not overly surprised in the sense that I always felt we had a strong case, and it was clear at the hearing that the applicant didn't have very good answers to the judge's questions, and the judge didn't seem to be satisfied, and that came out in the decision. Essentially, it's kind of what we've been saying all along. You're trying to say that we're enclosed, but you won't come out and tell us at what point we become enclosed. It's just this kind of this game where they're just trying to be as mysterious and dodgy with the key issue as they can be.
Yeah, well, it seemed like it's almost an issue of making up rules as you go. And, it was such a sad state to see how Canadians were having to adapt and do everything they could to try to just follow their religious convictions. And so I'm happy to hear about this win. How would you summarize why this case matters or should matter to Canadians?
I think it definitely matters in the sense when you look at the history of what happened here. The first judge who heard the emergency contempt motion back in December 2021 right away said that the tent was clearly in violation of the mandatory order without giving us an opportunity at all to state our case. And it was just so clear to the judge that there was just it wasn't even worth his time. And now here we have the Chief Justice, after giving us a chance to defend our case, coming to the opposite conclusion, which shows the importance of due process, of how justice suffers when it's rushed, and the problems that take place when public health emergencies are used as a way to circumvent due process. You have injustices that happen, and this was just one example. But it's nice to see this kind of vindication and clear demonstration. A lot of times we suspect that injustices happen, but here we have a judge really in a decision showing that it was unjust what happened a year ago.
Well, and it's nice precedent to have. And thanks to all of the Rebel viewers and readers who came together to donate at the Democracy Fund to help contract you, Jonathan Martin, who successfully represented this church and many other Canadians who were concerned about the attacks against religious freedoms in Canada.
It's been an expensive journey. None of this is cheap. There's been we've had 2 different contempt proceedings that I've been involved with. There's been two successful appeals at the Court of Appeal along the way, and a constitutional challenge that didn't get to trial because the province abandoned. They dropped their tickets a couple months ahead of the trial because of our constitutional challenge, but that took a lot of work to put together. And again, it kind of shows, that this is an unfortunate thing, that the province can make these laws that will breach fundamental rights and freedoms, and then a year later repeal them before any of them get in court, and there's really no way to have them addressed in many cases now. So, the fact that they when we filed a constitutional challenge, they withdrew, kind of says a lot. They weren't willing to stand by their rules in a chartered challenge.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's a big win, but not necessarily one for precedent. But we've had a huge win thanks to your help, the Democracy Fund, and everybody who donated at our special website to help in this situation. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
At Rebel News, we brought you the other side of the story with all things COVID-19. And when your rights were infringed upon, we helped you take action. Please help us continue to cover this successful win by donating to the Democracy Fund, who covered Pastor Phil's legal expenses at savepastorphil.com.